The moment a narcissist begins valuing you again after discarding you, and I want to start with something honest about this title before we go anywhere near the content, because the framing deserves examination. The word valuing is doing something specific here that requires precision before we build anything on top of it. Valuing implies genuine appreciation, the specific, personally directed recognition of worth that the word usually carries when it appears in the context of human relationships, and the honest account of what actually happens when a narcissist begins valuing you again after discarding you requires being clear about whether what they are experiencing genuinely constitutes valuing in that full sense, or whether it is something that resembles valuing from the outside while being organized around something considerably different on the inside. Because the distinction matters enormously for how the person on the receiving end of it interprets what is happening and what they decide to do with it. Let's establish the discard first, because the valuing that follows it is only comprehensible in the context of what the discard actually was. The discard is not what it feels like from the receiving end. From the receiving end, it feels like a verdict, like the narcissist evaluated you, found you insufficient, and made the rational decision to move on to something better. This interpretation is the most natural one available to someone who has just been discarded, because it is organized around the assumption that the narcissist's relational decisions are primarily about the people they are making decisions about. They are not. The discard is a supply economics decision. It is the narcissist's system concluding that the current primary supply source is in a phase of the supply cycle that makes other available sources more supply economically attractive. The person being discarded is not found insufficient in any absolute sense. They are found to be in a less productive phase of the supply cycle than the alternatives currently available. And that distinction between absolute insufficiency and relative supply economics position is the foundation of everything that produces the moment this episode is about. Because the supply cycle continues after the discard, the replacement source that made the discard supply economically rational moves through its own cycle. The love-bombing phase peaks, and the supply quality that the early phase generates begins its inevitable decline. The new source develops the perception and the patterns that all sources eventually develop with sufficient proximity to the narcissist's actual functioning. The supply quality declines. And as it declines, the narcissist's system begins running the assessment that it always runs when the current primary source's supply quality is declining, the assessment of the available supply landscape for sources whose potential exceeds the current source's declining production. And in that assessment, the discarded person appears, not as the person they were at the moment of discard, in the declining phase of their supply cycle, worn down by the dynamic, diminished by the devaluation, producing the reduced supply quality that the discard was the rational response to. They appear as the memory of what they were at their peak, at their most genuinely themselves, at the specific, often earliest phase of the relationship when the supply they provided had the specific quality and the specific quantity that made the relationship valuable to the narcissist's system in the first place. And the memory of the peak is what the assessment is comparing against the current source's declining production. This comparison, the memory of your peak against the current source's decline, is the beginning of the moment the title is pointing at, the moment the narcissist begins valuing you again. And understanding that what is being valued is the memory of your peak supply production rather than you as a person is the most important thing this episode can establish before we go any further. Because it determines everything about what the valuing actually is and what it is not, and what the person on the receiving end of it deserves to understand about what is being offered before they make any decisions about how to respond. The memory of the peak is not an accurate memory. This is another essential point that most accounts of this dynamic miss entirely. The discard required the retrospective devaluation, the specific psychological process through which the narcissist's system edits the memory of the former supply source in the direction of reduced significance in order to make the discard psychologically coherent. You cannot discard someone you genuinely valued without some psychological mechanism that makes the discarding feel justified. The retrospective devaluation is that mechanism. It produces a memory of the relationship that is systematically less positive than the actual experience of it was, that finds fault with what was there, that identifies insufficiencies in what was provided, that reduces the relationship's remembered significance to a level that makes the discard feel like a rational response to an accurate assessment, rather than a supply economics decision that the assessment was constructed to justify. This edited memory is what the system has been working with since the discard, and the moment the valuing begins again, the edited memory begins to be revised in the opposite direction. The faults that the retrospective devaluation identified become less prominent. The positive aspects of the supply relationship become more salient. The specific qualities that the person brought to the relationship that the replacement source is failing to replicate become more specifically remembered. And the valuing that results is organized around this revised memory, which is itself not entirely accurate, having been first edited negatively by the devaluation and then edited positively by the supply scarcity's comparative assessment. What is being valued is not you as you actually are. It is a memory of you that has been through 2 rounds of editing and that now reflects what the supply scarcity needs it to reflect rather than what the relationship actually was. The first sign that the valuing has begun is almost always the monitoring becoming more active. We have discussed monitoring in previous conversations, the background tracking that the narcissist maintains of former supply sources as a matter of the system's ordinary functioning. The monitoring that indicates the valuing has begun is different in its quality and its specificity from the background monitoring. It is more frequent, more specifically targeted at information about your current state, more organized around the particular question that the supply economics assessment is asking. Not just where are you and what are you doing, but specifically, who are you now, and what is the quality of what you would provide if the supply relationship were restored. The monitoring becomes intelligence gathering in a way the background monitoring never was, and the intelligence it is gathering is specific to the supply economics question the assessment is running, and what the assessment finds when the intelligence comes back, and what the second and third signs of the valuing look like, and why the person on the receiving end of the valuing deserves to understand the full architecture of what is approaching before it arrives. That is exactly where we are going next. What the assessment finds when the intelligence comes back is the most important factor in determining how quickly and how intensely the valuing accelerates into the behavioral expressions that the person on the receiving end will eventually encounter. And what the intelligence most consistently finds, in the cases where the valuing produces the most significant behavioral response, is something that the narcissist's system did not anticipate when the discard was made. It finds that you are doing better than the supply scarcity's comparative assessment expected, that the person who was discarded has, in the period since the discard, been building something, developing something, returning to something that was present before the relationship diminished it. The intelligence finds a version of you that is more specifically yourself than the version that was present at the moment of discard. And that finding, the intelligence reporting back that the former source is not in the diminished, depleted, discard-justified state the edited memory suggested they would be in, is what accelerates the valuing from the background assessment into something that begins producing behavioral expressions. The second sign that the valuing has moved from assessment into something more active is the indirect contact, not the direct reaching that comes later in the sequence. The specific, carefully deniable, precisely targeted indirect presence that the narcissist's system deploys when the assessment has produced a favorable output, but the risk calculation has not yet produced the confidence required for direct contact. The social media interaction that arrives with a specificity that coincidence cannot adequately explain. The mutual connection who mentions the narcissist in a context that carries the quality of something slightly too deliberate to be casual. The appearance in a shared social space that could plausibly be explained by independent reasons, but has the specific quality of someone whose awareness of your presence in that space preceded their arrival in it. All of these indirect contacts share a common structure. They are designed to register without being undeniable. To create awareness of the narcissist's attention without creating the vulnerability of explicit reaching that could be explicitly rejected. They are the system testing the environment before committing to the investment that direct contact would require. The third sign is the one that most people on the receiving end find most confusing and most difficult to interpret accurately, because it arrives in a form that is easy to receive as something other than what it is. It is the information that begins reaching you about the narcissist's current state, information that carries a specific quality of being curated for your reception, rather than simply being what it presents itself as. The mutual connection who mentions that the narcissist seems to be struggling. The social media content that has a tone or a theme that seems specifically organized around things that were meaningful in the relationship. The indirect communication of a vulnerability or a difficulty that the narcissist's public presentation would ordinarily never permit, but that the valuing's specific goal, producing your re-engagement, makes strategically worth permitting. This curated information is the system's preparation of the environment for the direct contact that is coming. It is softening the ground, creating the emotional context in which your reception of the direct contact will be warmer than it would be in the absence of the preparation. And the specific information that is curated, the vulnerability, the apparent struggle, the theme that touches something that was meaningful in the relationship, is selected with the specific accuracy of someone who knows, from the history of the relationship, exactly which emotional frequencies you are most likely to respond to with the warmth that the re-engagement requires. Now here is what this entire sequence means for you as the person it is directed at. And this is the part that requires the most honest and the most direct handling this episode can offer. The valuing is real in the sense that the supply economics assessment is genuinely producing a favorable output about what you would provide if the relationship were restored. The indirect contact is real. The curated information is real. The reaching, when it comes, will carry something that feels genuine because the need driving it is genuine. All of that is real, and none of it is the thing that it presents itself as being. It presents itself as renewed appreciation, as the narcissist having arrived at a revised understanding of what you were worth, as something that, if received openly, might produce a relationship that is different from what the relationship was before the discard. What it actually is, in every specific element of its structure and every specific feature of its operation, is a supply-seeking sequence, organized around the supply economics assessment's favorable output, directed at the specific person whose supply potential the assessment identified as worth the investment of the sequence's deployment. Not organized around you as a person, around what you would provide if the sequence successfully produces the re-engagement it is designed to produce. The person who receives the valuing without this understanding is the person most at risk of the sequence producing the outcome it is designed to produce. Because the valuing feels good, the attention feels good, the indirect contact, after the specific absence that the discard produced, carries a warmth that the nervous system responds to before the conscious mind has finished processing what is actually happening. The curated vulnerability activates the caring that was always genuinely present in you, and that the relationship required at such cost, precisely because it was genuine. All of it activates something real in you, and the activation of something real in you is exactly what the sequence was designed to produce, because your genuine response to what the sequence is presenting is what the re-engagement requires. And the re-engagement is what the supply economics assessment identified as the most efficient resolution to the supply scarcity that initiated the entire sequence. What serves you best in the presence of this sequence is not the performance of indifference that would prevent the activation. The activation is not the problem. Your nervous system responding to the attention and the warmth and the curated vulnerability with something genuine is not a failure of your discernment. It is simply what genuine caring does in the presence of things that were designed to activate it. What serves you best is the specific, grounded, completely honest assessment of whether what is being offered is what it is presenting itself as. Whether the valuing is organized around you as a person or around what the supply economics assessment has identified you as capable of providing. Whether the relationship, if restored, would be organized around something genuinely different from what it was organized around before the discard. And the honest answer to all three of these questions, based not on what the sequence is presenting, but on the actual history of how the narcissist's system has functioned across the full duration of everything that preceded this moment, is the most important information available to you right now. The valuing is real, the sequence is real, and the relationship it is designed to restore would be the same relationship it was before the discard. Because what has changed is not the narcissist's fundamental orientation toward you, but the supply economics calculation's current output. The calculation will change again. The cycle will continue. And you, having understood what the valuing actually is, are in the only position that genuinely serves you. The position of someone who can feel what the sequence activates and choose, from full information, rather than from the activation alone, what to do with what they are feeling. That choice is yours. It has always been yours. And now you have what you need to make it honestly.